Mings, much survived the Mings.
Solve the World, a fictional adventure told in 100 episodes. Episode 44, Scourge of the Earth. Friendly Baptist Church, West Virginia, Sunday morning. Some of our friends, our loved ones, dear sweet little ones, they are suffering. Oh, how they're suffering. You've seen it on the television, you've heard it on the radio, you've read about it on the internet. God's big bowl of wrath is pouring out like tomato soup on our brothers and sisters. This plague sees no difference between color, no difference between Jew, nor Greek, nor Muslim, or Hindu. It's taken down all of us. All of our brothers, all of our sisters. But I'll tell you this, I spoke to Brother Johnny, you know him, and his congregation. They're on their knees day and night. Night and day. They're just on the little old other side of those Sierra Nevada mountains. Out in Reno, Nevada. You think there's not a renaissance? You think every man, woman, child, and even little babies aren't night and day praying to the Lord Almighty that this plague upon the human race would come to an end? Would be halted by God's armored angels before them zombies crawl over those mountains? You know they are. I do not know if this is the end of days. I do not know if Jesus is fixing to come down here and swoop us up and out of here. I do not know. But let me tell you this, brothers and sisters, I know this much. The men, the government, those smarty-pants officers with their gas masks and hazmat suits, they'd like you and I to believe that everything's fine, that they've got the disease contained, and that no brain-rotting cannibals are climbing over Mount Rushmore. But I know, this much I know, unless we fall on our knees, grab our children, hug them as tight as we know how, filling them with peace and love, unless our knees are bloody from being on the ground so much because we're crying out to God, deliver us! Save us from your wrath, O Lord! Save us from your vengeance! Unless we do that in earnest every day and every night for the rest of our lives, well, what do you think's gonna happen? You think God's gonna stop this flood? You think he gives a rat's ass about us unless we admit, unless we say we're sorry? We're sorry for not loving him more. We're sorry we haven't offered ourselves as daily sacrifices. We're sorry we've introduced our children to sin. Don't you act like you haven't. We've fallen in love with this world. We love it so very much. Maybe Jesus is trying to tell us something. Maybe he's trying to warn us that the true death, you know I'm not talking about being eaten up by some diseased soul whose nose has fallen off. No, I'm talking about the true death. The second death, spiritual death. Yeah, I'll say it. Hell. H-E double hockey sticks. Maybe Jesus has been trying to warn us about that place. He's been whispering and whispering in our ears about it for years. Generations. Since Adam bit that apple. He's been whispering to us, warning us. And now, judgments have fallen, and it's eaten up the world. The Lord lost patience with us. He's not whispering anymore. No ma'am, no sir. He's a-shouting. He's shouting. If Friendly Baptist and all the other churches in all the other towns east of the Mississippi don't stop and repent, the gas mask men aren't going to keep us safe. Them dead bones are gonna crawl straight through those great walls in the Sierra Nevadas. If this is from God, ain't nothing stopping them bones. It's the top of the hour, and our non-stop coverage of the pandemic, Day 87, continues here at News Radio Station. minute-by-minute breakdowns of what you can be doing to stop the spread, as well as valuable insight from specialists on the field 24/7. I'm Brent McGolligers, and this hour, to take us through the most recent mutations of the pandemic, we're welcoming gene-splicing scientist Dr. Norwin Fleischt on air now. Dr. Fleischt, can you walk us through the evolution of the pandemic? Is it possible at this point to separate fact from fiction and mere rumor regarding this horrible atrocity?
It can only go so far, Brent. The simple fact of the matter is, the only DNA we've caught of this thing was nearly 3 months ago. And clearly, the situation has evolved.
And is continuing to evolve.
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell us, Doctor, how it's possible that this disease could mutate so fast?
This is speculation, but
wouldn't you say it's more than speculation at this point? It's clear now to us all that what we've seen, even in the last 2 weeks, Doctor, is drastically different than the reports and research done in Peru months ago.
Yes, well, the simple fact is, we're in the dark on this thing. People like me, the best we can do is make inferences based on how we've seen other diseases work before, and how we believe life works here on Earth.
Tell us about that. What inferences are you able to draw?
People think evolution always happens slowly, over millions of years.
You're saying that's a wrong assumption.
It tends to miss the point. Genetic changes occur through mutation. That's not so much about time as it is about numbers.
Numbers? What numbers?
Brent, if you want to grow wings, that would require a pretty serious mutation. What needs to happen in order for that to occur is a series of mutations over many, many generations. If there is to be change in humans, because our lives last roughly 70 to 80 years, and the average family has 2.1 children, that change is going to take, quite literally, millions of years. But with these microbes, these viruses, these bacteria, their procreation, their genetic reproduction is occurring at rates that are, say, maybe 1 billion times faster than us as a species.
Break it down for us. What are you saying?
I believe that this disease essentially finds a host, reproduces itself millions upon millions of times, and dies quickly. Each individual carrier may only live for a few seconds.
So the quickness of the change from birth, reproduction, to death is so rapid, am I understanding you correctly, that that's what you're saying is causing the change in symptoms and variation?
Yes, precisely, Brent.
With the pandemic reaching the scope that this one has, of course, there's going to be endless speculation and some pretty far-out theories. We had on yesterday a researcher that believes that this is not in fact just one disease, but that it's 2 distinct strands that have now combined, interbred. What do you think about that theory, Doctor?
Look, even if you just examine the way this disease attacks us, it seems highly unlikely that there's 2 separate demons out there.
That's fair, but how do you account for such dramatic changes? Our first reports out of South America,
which, by the way, we have that DNA from those earliest reports.
Yes, we've heard all the stories how the heroic doctors and scientists who decided to throw caution at the wind gave their lives in order so that we could obtain those early samples. That's water under the bridge, Doctor. It does make you wonder, however, why we haven't heard similar stories of heroicism in America. I've got numbers in my hand right now that project that there are currently 2 million with the disease, 4 million dead, and likely millions more before this is all said and done. Why can't we even get a blood sample? That seems preposterous, no?
Brent, I think if we look at the evolution of the pandemic, we might find some answers. Can we go back, please?
Okay, but please get around to answering my question.
Peru. What were the symptoms? The reactions? Answer: slow-moving necrosis combined with brain distortion, combining to reflect rabies-like symptoms. Fury. Cannibalistic tendencies, but the disease took weeks, if not months, to lay siege and ultimately kill the victim. Now, it seems the disease has mutated to a more effective weapon.
How do you mean?
If I see a man who's severely handicapped by necrosis, limbs breaking, appendages tearing off, I'm naturally going to run away from that man. What does the disease want? It wants to find a new home, another brain to procreate in.
You're saying the disease uses our brains as a sort of fertilizer.
This is conjecture, but yes. We think the brain hosts the disease like a home, like a dark, wet cave for bats.
Okay, yes, I see. Continue.
In order for the disease to be most effective, the necrosis needs to stop. That way, the feral man can chase me if I run away. But there's a compromise. If it's not slowly eating us, which is the primary cause of the necrosis, It has to eat like what we'd call the high fiber, the high super sauce, aka the brainstem. It feeds off of our brain stems, and the result is a much quicker fatality.
That explains some of the changes. The lack of leprosy we see in newer victims, the astronomical rise in quick deaths. But what about the rabies symptoms? The terrifying actions that many have described as turning people into zombies. Why has that gone away?
Go back to thinking what's best for the disease. The disease has always been spread the same way. Saliva. That hasn't changed, but now it's taken a more insipid form. Victims are being described as being hysterically depressed as well as lonely. I will run away from a diseased, feral man. But if my infected mother knocks on my door crying, I'm letting her in. I'm hugging her to try and comfort her. Therefore, I'm getting infected.
Does this explain the sudden stoppage of gut vomiting?
Yes. If my neighbor is rejecting internal organs, I'm staying away from him. If he's merely crying and maybe his nose is running, I'm more apt to touch him, to want to try to comfort him. This disease seems to have deciphered our desire for empathy and to empathize.
Doctor, it feels like this thing is just gonna keep changing until there's no one left on Earth. Can we anticipate its next move? Its next mutation?
No. Maybe. I don't want to cause a scare.
Tens of millions are dead, Doctor. We're already scared.
If I were the disease, I'd go airborne.
The doorbell started ringing at 4 a.m. It continued and continued and continued. Atticus, entrepreneurial spirit always at work, took floorboards out of the attic and used them to nail the windows on the first floor shut. Betty cuddled Scout. The two women kept their focus entranced on Disney's Mulan playing on Netflix. Atticus couldn't handle cartoons right now. He kept one ear listening to local radio news, and the other ear on the doorbells and the banging. This wasn't supposed to happen. America, to her credit, for the most part, stayed one step ahead of the pandemic, cutting all transportation to and from Mexico and South America almost from the start. The recently elected president wasn't worried about the U.S. appearing xenophobic or unmerciful. There was a new terror sweeping the world, and he was not going to let the blood-sucking demons of the Pacific into the world's only superpower, not on his watch. But it did. The Ides of March called it. The first reported case came to America's collective conscious on exactly March 15th. There was panic immediately. Within 3 days, the president, by executive order, quarantined essentially all of California south of Sonoma. And it was working. The terror was growing, millions of people were dying, but besides the unlucky souls trapped in Southern California, Americans were safe. For the moment. And the president wasn't going to stop there. When things go bad, power belongs not to the authorities, but to those who are willing to do. The president was a doer. He had 20-foot-tall walls erected along the entire Sierra Nevadas. The newest intel was that the infected now were not living for more than 72 hours, and the last 24 of those were so debilitating that the threat was severely reduced. That meant that if you could contain the infected for the first 48 hours after initial infection, you were okay. You'd make it. This thing could still be overcome. This thing could still peter out. This 21st century global war for humanity could still be won. All America had to do was build a wall. So she thought. At this moment, Atticus Further and the two women trapped in his house would beg to differ. Atticus had played out various scenarios in his mind of how he'd protect his little sister and or his girlfriend in the event of a zombie invasion. But this was different. This was so different. Yes, there were thoughtless meanderers in the street, but they didn't hobble, mouths ajar, chanting for brains. No, they cried, literally, like babies. They walked down the streets, their arms outstretched to the heavens, praying to a god that wasn't listening. Atticus watched as an old lady got infected. Miriam Solus, their cranky neighbor from down the street. She somehow didn't hear all the noise, all the commotion. Must not have had her hearing aids on. In her morning pajamas, she waddled out to pick the newspaper off the ground. When she got there, a young woman came up to her, tears streaking down her cheeks. The girl collapsed into the old lady's arms. Atticus watched this from his bedroom window. He thought maybe it was okay. Maybe they were hugging. The girl was sobbing and, seemingly, petting old Miriam all over her aged face. Then, the young girl got up, momentarily composed herself, and started back down the street, walking in the middle of the road, intermittently sobbing. Her cheeks had 2 streaks of dark purple painting her face, skin rashes from too many salty tears. Miriam was catatonic on her front lawn for what seemed to Atticus to be several minutes, though in truth it was closer to 45 seconds. Then, young Mr. Further watched as tears started pouring down old Mrs. Solus's face. She was drooling profusely as well, and scratching herself all over. She started calling out, several times, with just one name on her lips.
Henry!
Miriam Solus called out for her dead husband Henry. Maybe he could appease the pain somehow. From beyond the grave, take away this small, horrible moment. Somehow, take away this shame. Miriam Solus stood up and started walking down the street, crying, sobbing, praying for an answer that wouldn't come. Another difference between these infected ones and zombies. These people didn't travel in packs. Atticus saw. They didn't. When 2 were even in the line of sight from one another, they'd work hard to distance themselves. These were thinking people, and they didn't want to be associated with the other infected. More than once on that foggy morning, Atticus saw 2 walkers, infected, see each other, and simultaneously start walking in disparate directions. Then, the fateful doorbell. The doorbell to end all doorbells. No one answered. The girls were on their 3rd viewing of Mulan. They had evolved some sort of I Spy game now with the movie, but Atticus couldn't quite figure out how it worked, and the radio exacted his attention too often to stay focused. After the doorbell was left to no avail, there came a yell. It was more of a yelp, actually. All 3 inmates sanctioned in the house Further and knew that voice. Joseph Further. He'd come home to his eminently maturing son and still innocent daughter. The paterfamilias had arrived. But why was he crying?
Kids! Children! Atticus! Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! Atticus!
Molly Further, Atticus and Scout's mother, died shortly after Scout's birth. Joseph Further had raised his children, and he did this while being off traveling the country on the Sunset Limited half the time. Nevertheless, he was such a good man, such a warm father, that his returns after long days and nights gone always came with cheers and hugs and kisses, and even squeaks of joy from little Scout. Not this time. Scout ran downstairs. She grabbed a tool and peered through the front door peephole. Joseph Further was dressed in his conductor uniform. At first glance, he'd appear quite respectable, but a loving daughter saw through the thin veil immediately. His cheeks were puffy, red, and wet. His nose ran disgustingly into his mouth and down his chin in 2 solid streams. His eyes were bloodshot purple, and he looked scared. Scout had never seen fear on her father's face. "Scout, get away from the door." "But he needs our help." "Step away from the door, Scout." "Come here," Betty said to Scout, arms open wide. "Let's get back down to business. We have to defeat the Huns. Again."
Scout! Scout, can you hear me? I can hear you, sweetheart. Oh, God, open the door, please. Please, Scout, Scout.
Scout examined her brother's eyes. They were unflinching, unforgiving, while Betty was open-armed, doughy-eyed, and altogether condescending. Scout was a girl of action. She took after her mother more than her brother or father. Before Atticus could stop her, Scout unlocked the 2 door locks and swung the front door open. Fearing that his father would swoop in like a vulture, Atticus pounced on Scout, tackling her and rolling her away from the door. It happened too fast for Scout to even scream. On the ground, Atticus looked up to see that his father still stood in the doorway, apparently hesitating, fully unsure of his next move.
I just wanted to see you two.
Joseph choked out through tears.
Betty, would you give me a moment with my children? This won't take long.
She's not going anywhere. You're infected, Atticus said, holding the now sobbing Scout in his arms on the floor. You're not welcome in this house.
This is my household, son. I'm coming in.
Joseph further marched in. Filling with terror, never expecting that his own father would be the talking zombie that did him in, Atticus, on the floor, inched and scooted away from his dad, trying pitifully to shield Scout from the oncoming doom.
I'm going to sit on the couch. Betty, please move. I don't want to touch you. That's not my job.
Okay. Joseph sat on the couch. The same couch that Jennifer Dash once slept on.
Scout. Scout, listen to me. Listen to me for a moment. Listen to me, Scout.
She's not talking to you.
I've had enough of your attitude, Atticus. I'm the man of this house. You will... You will know your place.
I'm protecting her, Dad.
I know. I can't think. Oh God. Oh God, help us. Oh God. Help me, God. Oh God. Help. I can't think. Oh God.
He continued on like that for a while. Atticus whispered to Scout, Scout, I need you to do something right now for me. Go to Betty.
Oh God.
She sprinted up and ran into Betty's arms. Atticus slipped into the kitchen and the further depths of the house. He returned quickly and prepared, a baseball bat in hand and a sharp kitchen knife jammed into his back pocket.
Scout. Look at me. You stay there! Just look at me.
Daddy?
Yes, Scout. Listen, some bad things are happening. I'm not going to be around anymore. I want you to remember. Always say your prayers before meals, before bed, and first thing when you wake up. Okay, Daddy. Good girl. I love you. Remember that I've always loved you. Since the day you were born, since the time I laid eyes on you when your mother was here. Betty,
Yes, Mr. Further?
I'm thankful you're in my son's life. You be good to him. Use kind words all the time. That's all you have to do. Just be kind to him. Say nice things. That's more challenging than it sounds.
Yes, sir.
Atticus, my son.
For the sake of his tribe, Atticus said nothing to his father. He had to keep his cool, to stay calm in case of, well, if the worst case came to be.
Don't you blame God. Oh, God. Don't you blame God for this. Don't you do that. He's a good guy. You can't turn your back on him. You cannot do this. I love you.
Joseph's head was shaking violently. He was suppressing strong desires. Everything within the train conductor's hell of a body was shouting at him, begging him, cursing him to somehow touch his family. That's all. Just a touch. Just to rub his son's cheeks. Just to kiss his baby daughter's hair. Just to hug his son's girl. That's all. That's all his cursed body wanted. And with every ounce, every fiber, every will of his ultimate identity, Joseph further resisted these deep urges.
I'm gonna go lay down in the bath. Atticus. Oh, God, Atticus. In 2 minutes. I want you alone, to come into the bathroom. I want you to protect your family. Scout and Betty are your responsibility now. Do you understand me? Oh, God. I can't do it myself. I need help. I need help with this one. I do. I need help. This one last time. I told Jesus I'd not do it myself. I'd never do it myself. Do you understand me?
Atticus was silent.
Dear God, boy, answer me!
Yes, Father. And we're back here live on News Radio Station, your safest and most reliable source for moment-to-moment news on the pandemic and more. I'd like to introduce to you today Captain Alfred Bacon. He was supposedly aboard the adventure schooner Orion, drifting off the coast of Peru some 6 months ago when he and his crew supposedly came into contact with an infected boat of Peruvians. This, Captain, was so long ago in the history of this disease, if your claims are correct, then you were in contact with essentially the first victims of this terrible pandemic. Can you walk us through your experience? I don't appreciate the supposedlys, Brent, but yes, I'd like your listeners to know the true origins of this devastating event. Okay, Captain, tell us your story. I was the captain of an adventure schooner, owned and sanctioned for the seas by Lilith Babbitt. I received my paychecks from Lilith Babbitt. Various well-to-do people, rich people, millionaires mostly, paid us to take them on certain vacations that otherwise aren't readily available to the public. What sort of vacations are we talking about here, Captain? That's not what I came here to talk about, Brent. All right, continue on. What happened to you and your crew on the South Pacific? We got a distress call from a ship. That ship ended up being a fishing vessel called the Known Triangle. Any significance to that ship name? Not that I'm aware of. When we got near the ship, we found the crew to be nearly rabid. They were like vultures, trying to get on board our ship. Would you say that what you saw was similar to the earliest reports of this disease?
Yes, quite so. One of our crewmen, a Mexican, Jorge Robles, he volunteered to go on board their ship and try to understand what was going on. You have to remember that at this point we had no reason to suspect that this was a transmittable disease at work. The crew of the known triangle attacked Jorge. He was able to battle them off, but he got infected. Before we made our decision, he got this whole story from their captain. Their ship came close to a certain unidentified island, and they saw an SOS signal come from the unknown island. They went there and found dozens of diseased mutant animals. They stayed long enough to meet a small Russian crew of scientists.
Stop right there. I want to be clear, very clear here, so that listeners understand what you're saying. This has potentially fantastic, and I mean that word in terms of huge, not wonderful, but just fantastic, potentially fantastic ramifications. You're saying the mutant animals, the ones reportedly hunting locals in Peru, the original carriers of the pandemic, you're saying they were brought there by some Russians?
I'm saying the Russians were using the island to do illegal gene extraction and implementation, and I believe their government sent them there to do that.
You're saying the disease that's ravaged half the world, almost the entire Western Hemisphere, you're saying that the Russian government has caused it?
Yes.
This is phenomenal news. However, I have to cut you off right there, Captain Alfred Bacon. We'll get back to you, I promise, but we have a duty to our audience. This is just in some very urgent and troubling news. There are beginning to be reports coming in just now, just this morning, right now, and apparently YouTube videos are already streaming into the internet, that somehow, some way, the pandemic has spread. We're getting reports that, and this is just conjecture, I believe, but the belief is at this stage that somehow a ferry carrying dozens of infected has landed on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. Earliest intel is telling us right now the infected have landed in the small Louisiana town of Lake Charles. I repeat, Lake Charles has been hit. The infected appear to have made landfall in Lake Charles, Louisiana. If this is true, what's stopping them? What's stopping this thing from taking over the whole world? Atticus Further is a flawed human being. He is not perfect, and having never dealt with real pressure, a genuine crisis, he was unable to do what had to be done. His father waited in the bathtub of the Further house for over 40 minutes. For an excruciating 40 minutes, Joseph Further waited for his son to kill him. Mercifully, after those 40 minutes, Betty came in, and Betty ended it. Solve the World is produced by me, Dante Stack. Appropriate attribution for all the music and sound effects can be found on our website show notes page at dantestack.com. Guys, I'm putting a lot of effort these days into our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/solvetheworldpodcast. I post every day, and I have a focus on the visual elements. So you should totally go there to be more involved and more thrust into the visual universe of Solve the World. I also have generated a meme page on our website that I'm constantly using to put memes on the Facebook page for you to share. Hopefully this can be an avenue that we can help spread the word of Solve the World via these visual cues in social media.
Hello, I'm Amber from Indiana. I've listened to all 100 episodes of Jenn's story. Now we know the cost of Jennifer wasting time at the Druidry Center. While she imbibes on Mama and Fatterbek's strange rituals, the world's falling to ashes. Next week on Solve the World, Jennifer faces the labyrinth. Mazes are made for monsters.